Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Perry and Marty Granoff Music Center at Tufts University. In the unlikely event of an emergency, we ask that you now take a moment to locate the exit nearest to your seat, keeping in mind that it may be either behind you or in front of you. At this time, please take a moment to silence your mobile telephones and all other electronic devices. Audio and video recording of the performance is strictly prohibited without advance permission. Thank you, and enjoy the performance.
So how you doing?
I'm doing great, just doing what needs to be done. And
What does that mean?
I'm sorry, Dad.
Why don't we just have lunch and talk? We can do that, right? Please. You think that you have this under control.
I understand why I do things. It doesn't make me any different. You're just embarrassed because I was like this amazing thing, like your special creation or something, and you don't like who I am now.
Yeah? Who are you, Nick?
This is me, Dad. Here, this is who I am.
This is not you. This is not you, Nick.
What are you doing, huh? You always gotta be controlling everything all the time.
Let me book your room
No, Dad.
at a hotel for a couple of nights.
Dad. I don't want it to go like this.
My son has gone missing. Nicholas Sheff, S-H-E-F-F.
There's no one by that name, sir.
There are moments that I look at him, this kid that I raised, who I thought I knew inside and out, and I wonder who he is. I thought we were close. I thought we were closer than most fathers and sons. Why?
I felt better than I ever had, so I just kept on doing it.
This isn't us. This is not who we are. My son is out there somewhere, and I don't know what he's doing. I don't know how to help him.
You can't!
I don't feel like I have a disease. This isn't like cancer. This is my choice. I put myself here.
I failed. I can't do it alone.
I need to find a way to fill this black hole in me. I still have a family. I want them to be proud of me.
What you have, you're gonna find it again. You're gonna get it back. Do you know how much I love you? I love you more than everything.
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 Good evening. It is so wonderful to see so many members of our Tufts community here tonight. I'm Dana Cunningham. I'm the Dean of Tisch College, and I have the great pleasure of introducing tonight's program. So this is the first Tisch Solomont Speaker Series event of the semester. And this conversation with author, producer, advocate, and self-identifying recovering addict, Nic Sheff. You saw this amazing trailer just now of this critically acclaimed movie based on his life and his memoir, Tweak. His father, David Sheff's book by the same name. We hosted a film screening of the movie last week, and it's such a powerful film. If you haven't already seen it, watch it, please. Do watch it. I want to thank our event co-sponsors, Tufts Harm Reduction Education for Alcohol and Drugs, THREAD. How many of you are familiar with THREAD? Okay, well now you'll all be familiar with THREAD after tonight. And the Film and Media Studies program. Your collaboration, those two organizations, along with Alan and Susan Solomont, the sponsors of the Solomont Speaker Series, are what made this event possible tonight. Before we get started, I want to encourage all of you to join after the program ends to explore our action table. Did you guys see it as you walked in? Lots of resources, educational and actually interventional, available out at the table, and tips for how to get engaged with harm reduction work. And Nic will be out there signing copies of his New York Times best-selling book, which will be available for purchase, let me say that. Please. You're going to hear more about Nic's life and work shortly from Tufts senior Sarah Lotzoff. She will introduce Nic and be in conversation with him. We're particularly excited about this event because of Sarah's leadership. So I want to talk a little bit about Sarah. I first met her in the spring when she came to my office hours with an idea that she was extremely passionate about, and that is hosting Nic Sheff for a public event to benefit the Tufts community. Sarah is a fierce advocate for harm reduction, education for drugs and alcohol on campus and off, and she's worked tirelessly on this issue throughout her time at Tufts. I was impressed not only by Sarah's deep commitment to this work, which she will tell you about in her own words in a minute, but also her compassion and care in ensuring this event took place with the necessary support and resources. Since that first meeting, Sarah worked closely with my colleagues at Tisch to invite Nic to campus and to plan a meaningful program. We think this program is going to have real impact in this community. From working with Thread to offer free Narcan trainings on the campus, to hosting a film screening of Beautiful Boy last week, to connecting with partners across the university, she has been instrumental every step of the way. At Tisch College, we often talk about the importance of civic engagement and participation of young people to take on big challenges facing communities today. She is truly a powerful example of this in action. I'm proud of and grateful for her leadership. I want to shout out to her family who is here. Thank you for giving us Sarah. I should say, lending us Sarah. And I'm so looking forward to her conversation tonight with Nic. Please join me in welcoming Sarah Lotzoff.
Everybody. Well, thank you, Dean Cunningham. That was very nice. And thank you all so much for coming tonight. This is just like such a dream, and I can't tell you what this means to be able to just be here and to be able to talk with Nic. That's crazy. So my introduction to Nic's story began, like a lot of people, through the memoir Beautiful Boy, which was written by Nic's father, Nic Sheff. And it describes Nic's decade-long struggle with substance use and relapse and his eventual recovery. And reading this book was very powerful for me, but it was also very painful because my older brother Ben struggled with substance use for years, and he hid it for a while. And when my family just became aware of the severity of it, I just watched them give literally everything in them to help. Meanwhile, my relationship with my brother was always difficult and kind of fraught. So as he was going into treatment and he was moving towards recovery, I didn't really know where I fit into that. So that was, I could see sort of myself in some of David's writing. And then when I read Nic's own memoirs about his addiction and mental health, they're called Tweak and We All Fall Down, I kind of felt like I was just like cracked open emotionally. His writing is like raw and it's funny, but it's also like brutal at times, and then it's really tender and sweet in other parts. And it's just like the most authentic, I think, kind of representation of like the complexity of a person. And I felt like I saw Ben, and I also felt like I saw myself. And so it was through Nic's writing that I really felt like I had found my way back to my brother. He had already died at that point. It was last April of an accidental fentanyl overdose. He relapsed at school, and the cocaine that he had bought was contaminated with fentanyl, and he didn't know, and he died. And you know, with him also died his chance at recovery, and also my chance of repairing our relationship. It just all ended there, and I was and am still just left with the pieces of it. And you know, for all of our conflict, he was so smart, and I can just remember how musical he was. He was always humming something or playing the trombone. Honestly, found it really annoying, and now like what I wouldn't give to be able to just hear him play that again. And he was complicated, and he was sensitive, and I miss him. And this loss is a pain that's going to stay with me forever. So at this point, in case I don't get to say it again, I want to say that if you do use substances, please carry Narcan and test them with fentanyl test strips, and you can get them free from Thread always. So, I mean, they save lives, so you should take advantage. So back in February, as the mark of my brother's death, the year mark was coming up, I was thinking like, how do I want to commemorate this? Do I want to commemorate this at all? What is this going to look like? It was just a lot that sort of came up. And I started thinking about Nic, and I started thinking about what his books mean to me, and it was kind of like instantaneous that I was like, I'm going to do everything that I can do just to like try and see if I can get him to campus. I have no idea how I would go about doing this. I have never organized an event before. I've never interviewed anybody before. This is like just all new territory for me, but I'm going to be moderating a discussion with him, and that's crazy. I met some really wonderful and supportive people through Thread and through Tisch College who just made me feel like I could do this, and you know, they helped me get this little like fledgling dream, this like complete shot in the dark off the ground, and it's 9 months later, and we're all here together, and that's pretty cool. So Nic's story reminds us of our shared humanity, I think, above all, and about the importance of vulnerability and connection. He's living proof that addiction is treatable, that recovery is possible, that, you know, relationships that have been damaged by substance use disorder can be repaired, and that just above all, like, there's hope for the future, and that's a really powerful thing. Nic has been sober since 2011, and he continues to write, and he travels the country, and he speaks about substance use, mental health, bipolar disorder, and recovery. And he seeks to raise awareness of dual diagnosis and the frequent interconnection between substance use and often unseen, undiagnosed, untreated mental illness. So in addition to Tweak and We All Fall Down, he's also written the books High, Everything You Want to Know About Drugs, Alcohol, and Addiction, and Schizo, which is his critically acclaimed novel about a teen's downward spiral into mental illness. He drew upon his own history of self-harm and attempted suicide as a writer for Netflix's controversial series, 13 Reasons Why, and upon his experiences in rehab as a writer for the ABC Family/Freeform series Recovery Road. Nic was also a writer on AMC's crime drama The Killing, and has written several features and developed a TV series with Warner Brothers, USA, Amazon, and Paramount Television. He's also appeared on the Oprah Winfrey Show, The Today Show, Fresh Air with Terry Gross, and on CNN with Sanjay Gupta and ABC with Diane Sawyer. Nic really hopes that like the media attention that the film adaptation of Beautiful Boy will help raise awareness and create more empathy for people who are struggling with substance use disorder, and hopefully inspire more people to recognize danger signs and then get help. Nic has been recognized as a life-changing speaker who puts a compelling human face to our country's substance use epidemic. So we are so lucky to have him here tonight. Please join me in welcoming Nic Sheff.
Thank you, Sarah. We shook hands backstage already, so.
Okay. So my first question, we know beautiful boys, probably how most people, I would say, at least my generation, kind of came to know your story, and then also your book Tweak and your dad's book. But a lot of that was took place in a much earlier time in your life. So what do you feel like has changed for the past decade of your life that we don't know about?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, I mean, it's funny, like I wrote Tweak when I started it when I was only 22 years old. And then I guess I had a bad kind of relapse like halfway through writing it, and then I finished it and it came out when I was like 25. And that was 15 years ago. You know, I think the person that I was when I wrote that book is, you know, I mean, I'm the same person, but I'm also, you know, really different now. But I'm glad in a lot of ways that, like, I wrote it when I was so young, and it was also, I mean, first of all, it was all really fresh for me, but also I feel like I was capable of being really honest and kind of revealing of things that I think I wouldn't necessarily be now. You know, I feel like I'm much more, I don't know, private now or something, or guarded, and I wasn't back then. And so it's a cool kind of time capsule of where I was at that time. But the main thing was, I think, you know, when I finished Tweak, it kind of ends on a note of like, I think from what I remember is like I'm in treatment, and, you know, it's kind of like maybe things are going to get better. But I still really didn't know that it was possible to like live a full, happy, you know, kind of beautiful life in sobriety, because I just hadn't had that experience yet. And I always thought that getting sober was going to mean having to live this kind of like second tier kind of consolation prize life where I was always going to be not doing the thing that I really wanted to be doing. And, you know, 15 years later, whatever, I can say that that's not the case at all. Like, I love my life today. I love being sober. I feel like being sober, it almost makes me feel like I'm like on the winning team or something, because I have like this community of, you know, friends around me, and these tools that I've been given, you know, through the 12-step program and through, you know, therapy and psychiatry and all the stuff I've done, that I can apply, you know, not just in terms of like staying off of drugs and staying sober, but in terms of kind of all areas of my life. And, you know, the fact that I can kind of wake up in the morning and feel real like joy just to like be alive, and it's not about any of the kind of external things in my life, like having the movie made about the books or any of that stuff. Like, that stuff is weird and stressful and stuff. Like, what really makes me happy is just these little things, like going for a walk with my dog, or watching a movie with my wife or something, or I have a son that was born 3 months ago, and you know, being able to spend time with him, like and to be present for that, you know, is such a gift. And I just never thought it was possible. And the cool thing, I'll stop talking after this, but the cool thing is, you know, I've traveled around the country. Literally, I've been to all 50 states at this point, and I've met people, you know, tens of thousands of people who have exactly the same story that I have, that, you know, were at the total bottom of, you know, having lost everything, thinking that they could never repair their relationships, thinking that they could never have a real life. And, you know, through doing the work that they were encouraged to do, they've been able to put the pieces of their lives back together and build these really beautiful lives for themselves. So it's a really cool thing to be able to share, is that, you know, we can build our lives back and have lives that are even more beautiful than we ever could have imagined.
That's very nice. I wanted to ask, because I watched an interview that you gave with Timothée Chalamet like a couple years back when the movie came out, where you were saying that, like, you know, obviously recovery is a very big part of your life, but you were saying, like, I'm doing other things now. So I guess I was wondering how do you sort of view recovery? Because I guess on the one hand it's like a lifelong like project, but also how does that change over the years, especially as you accumulate years being sober?
Yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting question. I mean, I definitely in order to be okay on a daily basis, like, there are a lot of things, there's a lot of work that I have to do. I mean, not a lot, but there is some work that I have to do in order to be okay. Like, I mean, the way that I look at it is the way that I think it is, which is that I have a disease. You know, it's the disease of addiction. It's the disease of alcoholism. I also have, you know, been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, so and, you know, depression, whatever. So I have psychiatric disorders. So there's things I need to do on a daily basis to, like, make sure that I'm okay. Like, I have to take my medication. I have to, you know, talk to my psychiatrist twice a month now. I go to 12-step meetings. I do the work that they tell you to do in the 12-step meetings. So, you know, there is this stuff that I have to do in order to, like, be okay every day. The cool thing, again, to be able to share is that, like, the work does work. You know, when I do the work, like, my life gets better. I'm able to, you know, have a really full life, like I talked about, and enjoy being a dad and being a husband and being a dog dad or whatever that's called. And, but yeah, and then in terms of, like, my work and stuff, you know, I wrote Tweak, and then I wrote a follow-up which was called We All Fall Down, and then there it is. But then at a certain point I was like, okay, I can't just, like, keep writing books about being an addict, because I'm just going to run out of things to write about. So I started writing for television, which was really, you know, fun and challenging, because I didn't ever go to, like, film school. I never finished college or anything, and I did always have this kind of I don't know, I didn't understand exactly how, like, formal education could really help me, but since I'm talking to a group of college students, I will say that college is awesome, and I having to learn how to do this stuff without a formal education is, like, way harder and takes way longer, because you know, I didn't know what I didn't know, and so I kind of bungled my way through it. But that said, you know, like, I'm right now, like, I'm writing a movie for whatever, and I'm writing.
I want to hear about the movie.
Okay. I'm writing a movie that is for whatever, Leonardo DiCaprio's production company or whatever, and I know that, and then working on this series, but they're all kind of connected. Like, everything that I'm working on is always kind of connected to something personal, and because recovery is such a part of my life, and even when I'm writing something that is like the Leonardo DiCaprio thing is about, like, a famous outlaw surfer, but there's still elements of you know, sort of recovery stuff that comes in there, and my own personal experience. So I feel like, even when I try to get away from it, it still is. It's such a part of me and a part of my life that it kind of can't help but seep into things that I do, even that aren't, like, directly recovery related. If that makes sense.
No, it makes sense that everything's like a product of you, so
yeah,
these facets are going to show up in different ways.
And I think, like, for, you know, writing stuff, it's always like you always try to connect with what you're writing about or I always do, from a personal level. And, you know, it is such a part of my life, and now it's, you know, obviously less about, like, staying sober and staying off the drugs. It's about you know, trying as much as I can to, like, live a good life and be a good functioning member of society, and also to try to, you know, help other people if I can and work with others, which is what you're doing, which is so amazing, and it's why it's such an honor to be talking here with you, so thank you.
Nic Sheff. Anyway, okay, so you're talking about like making meaning and sort of connecting with people, and I wanted to ask about your relationship with your dad, because I know, I mean, obviously you worked on the movie together, and your relationship is just a really strong through line through your books. So I'm just curious if now that you have your own child and you're a father yourself, like, has that sort of informed your own relationship with your dad, specifically just like in the context of everything that you've been through together?
Yeah, that's interesting. I feel like a lot of people don't know this necessarily, but after I got out of my last treatment center, I went for about a year without talking to my dad or anyone in my family, because I was so I'd relapsed so many times, and I'd sort of built my relationship back with my dad and my stepmom and my little brother and sister especially, and I would sort of build the relationship back with them, and then I would relapse, and it just felt like I was, it was so hard for them. I mean, that's an understatement. It was so brutal for them. And so getting out of treatment the last time, I wanted to make sure that I could like really stay sober before sort of rebuilding that relationship. So I went like a whole year without talking to them. And during that time, that was when I finished writing Tweak. And I finally, got it done, and it was going to be published. And so that was when I reached out to my dad, first like through, I guess, like email, and then text messages, and we talked on the phone, whatever. And so when I talked to him, I said, I've been sober for a year. If you're open to it, like, I'd love to start, trying to like rebuild our relationship or whatever. And I that book I was working on, like, I finished it, and it's going to be published. And my dad said, oh, that's interesting, because I also wrote a book that was about our experience, and it's going to be published. And so we had this kind of very weird opportunity that was, crazy. Was we were able to like send each other our books and read them. And for me, reading my dad's book, I really got to see the way that my actions affected the people that love me in a way that was, very profound. And, I always sort of had this idea, like, all right, my dad, when I was, I was like 8 or 9 or something, he got remarried, and then he had my little brother and sister. So we had this like other family. So I always thought my dad was going to be able to be like, okay, I have one son who's like a dud, but I'm just going to like forget about him and just focus on this like good family that I have. But reading my dad's book, I could see that, that was not possible for him. Like, when I was in my active addiction, he was just constantly, full of anxiety about where I was. And his marriage almost broke apart because of my addiction and because of how he wasn't able to be there for his wife and kids because of me. And so reading that really changed things for me, I will say. And what my dad talks about is when he read Tweak, he had this idea that when I was like relapsing, which, as I said, I did a lot, that I was kind of just like wanting to go have fun and party and like go have a good time or whatever, and that I was just kind of giving my middle finger or whatever to everyone that cared about me. And what he says is when he read Tweak, he got to see that when I was relapsing, it wasn't that I was like having fun or partying. It was like I was in a ton of pain, and the drugs and alcohol were the only thing that had ever taken that pain away from me. And so I would reach out to them to try to feel better. And then as soon as I did, this invisible switch would get flipped, and I just couldn't stop. And when I was in my active using, it wasn't fun. It was like one horrific thing after another. And so he says, reading Tweak really helped him to forgive me and to understand, what my disease was. And then when the books came out, we had the opportunity to like travel around the country together and talk about these things in a way that was really hard, but also kind of amazing. And it helped us to kind of get through, I think, some of the resentments that were still there. And, it's amazing how much, I think talking about things and really like facing them does help to sort of heal them. And, at this point, I don't know, my dad and I are so close. He is, literally is like one of my best friends. I talk to him every day. And, I think, I don't know when, there was definitely a certain point where I know that he stopped worrying about me, and I don't know when that was exactly, but I can feel it now that, it's been a long time, but I can feel it. That's like, it's just, that anxiety that he always had around me and whether I was going to be okay, he doesn't have that anymore. And I can feel that from him, and it is such a relief because it just lets us just, be able to be, father and son and friends and everything without that added fear that was always there for him. And he's been a great grandfather so far, so that's been really fun to be able to see him in that role.
Oh, that's really interesting, just because, you can tell in the movie and then just in the book too, like for all the tension that existed in the relationship, like it was always underpinned with just like such devotion and love, and that's kind of where the despair was coming from. So this kind of segues into something else I wanted to ask about the movie. So the last scene, I hadn't watched the movie until last Thursday when we did the screening, because I was nervous, and I was right to be nervous because it was a beautiful movie that very much impacted me. So the final scene, it's your character and your dad's character, and you're sitting on these like lawn chairs in front of this big wall, and you're kind of like dwarfed by it. And I think your character had just gotten out of the hospital after an overdose, and it's just like crying, kind of just like curled in on himself. And then he turns to Steve Carell's character and like just gets like enveloped, like he's a little child just being held, and like the despair and like the exhaustion is just like so palpable. And I wanted to know like why that was the note that you chose to end the movie on, because I felt like it was really powerful, because it's like realistic. It's not like a happy spin where you're like, and everything was okay at the end. It's like showing the sort of the pain of it. But what was the process?
Well, I think it is hard to, one of the things that was hard about adapting our stories into the movie, and I think it's the thing that makes it hard to tell sort of addiction stories actually, is that they are very repetitive in a way, or they can be in a way that's not very cinematic, because a normal like movie is, you have the 3 acts or whatever, and there's this triumphant moment at the end. But the thing about addiction is that so often relapse is a part of recovery. And, there were so many times in my life where it did seem like I had sort of put my using behind me, and I was doing better, and I was working and, going to meetings and stuff. And then I would end up relapsing again. And it was so devastating for everyone around me, and confounding, and a lot of times I feel like I would even be surprised by it. Like I'd find myself having relapse and be like, not even know exactly how I got there. And so, it was hard, I think, when we were trying to tell the story, because there were so many times where it was like, okay, there's a triumphant moment where things are better, but then for whatever reason, I would relapse again. And I sort of described it as like, I always felt like I was like on fire, and the drugs and alcohol were the only thing that had ever put that fire out. And so when that fire would come back on me again, I would reach out to the drugs and alcohol to try to feel better. And it really is like this invisible switch would get flipped, and I just couldn't stop once I started, no matter what. And I tried so many different things. Like I tried just smoking weed, and would end up smoking pot, from morning until night, and then eventually it would lead me back to hard drugs again. And the same thing with alcohol. So there was this feeling like this was something that I wasn't sure I was ever going to be able to get past. And I also know, in some ways, how lucky I am too, because and we were talking about this before, but when I was, the way that I was using drugs at the time, I wouldn't be able to do that now because of fentanyl and how dangerous it is. And the fact that people that are just think they're just using cocaine or just using crystal meth or even just taking study drugs like Adderall or whatever will end up having fentanyl in the drugs, and they'll overdose and die. And I've had so many people close to me. I've lost so many people close to me in the 12-step program, especially in the last 5 years because of that. So it felt like to end the movie on a note of like, this is behind me, or this is behind these characters forever, and they're all gonna live happily ever after, just wouldn't be truthful or fair to the people that were still struggling. And I do know that as long as it's been for me, I do hear stories all the time of people who've been sober for 20 years or something, and they'll decide to try drinking again, and we'll end up either having to and end up losing everything and ending up back in treatment, or end up losing their lives. So that's the scary thing about addiction, is it's a chronic illness. It gets worse. It doesn't ever get better. And it is something that, as someone who has this disease, I have to be hyper vigilant about. And so that was, I don't know, it was something we were trying to like convey in the movie without it being like too horribly depressing, but also not sort of falsely optimistic or whatever. Mm-hmm. And, based on like sort of the timeline of when that the movie ended, like I did relapse a number of times after that. So so that was also just being truthful to my story.
Mm-hmm. That's like the idea of the process of like relapsing, all that. I think that's why I really liked We All Fall Down so much too. I mean I was rereading it the other day, and like it's after you've sort of stopped using all the hard drugs, but you're still drinking and you're still smoking a lot of pot, and there's like the like relationship addictions too. So it's sort of, I just was really struck by that. It's like the idea that this sort of behavior can transfer to other things, and it does take all that work over time.
That's an interesting point. Yeah, I think the relationship addiction stuff is, I mean, anything for me, I always felt like I really hated myself, and felt, I just felt really bad about myself. And so anything that could make me, that I thought would make me not feel that way, was something that I was gonna like reach out to and try to grab hold of, because I didn't want to sit with who I was, who I am. And so, yeah, whether that was, for me, like, other drugs, obviously alcohol, but also relationships were a huge thing that I sort of looked to try to give me a sense of feeling okay about myself. And that was something, I really had to work through sort of alongside the substance abuse stuff.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask you, because, you're talking about like the process of this all, and do you feel like there's ever this pressure to kind of, I don't quite know how to phrase it, but like the idea of like the prodigal son kind of keeps coming back into my mind, like you have to tie it up in a way that's like digestible and understandable for people, and sort of act like, oh, this is all behind me, and like just be very sort of clear publicly in a way that maybe personally is not like quite as like clear cut as it might feel. I don't know.
No, it's a good question.
Okay.
It's really interesting. It's an interesting question. I think genuinely I don't feel that way, but
Okay.
It's a good question. I think like I obviously still have a lot of problems in my life. Like, of course, like I get worried about stuff, and, life stuff, or my wife and I get in a fight or whatever, but in terms of like that feeling of like self-hatred and the feeling of, like just being so uncomfortable in my own skin, I feel like that has pretty much is not there anymore. Like I do feel like, as bad as any like external thing gets around me, like I'm being worried about, whatever, like there was the writer's strike I was talking to you about, like, you know, last year, and you know, Hollywood right now is kind of like in a gnarly place. Whatever. There's like things, external things that can be scary, and yeah, and I can get in a bad fight with my significant other or whatever. But in terms of like the feelings inside of me, like I feel like that work that I've done in the 12-step program, you know, in therapy, being on the right medication, blah 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 blah. Like I feel pretty like content with who I am now, and I like literally never thought I would be able to say that honestly ever. So it is like kind of a miracle, but it's not a miracle because, you know, it's just from doing the work that was suggested of me, and that's the really cool thing for people who are struggling, is that, you know, there are people in every community that are working to help people like me. And I really relied on, like I said, my psychiatrist, you know, my therapists, the people in the 12-step program. I did outpatient for a long time and worked with the counselors in the outpatient group. Like all that stuff, it all worked to really help me, you know, feel okay in myself, and I do today. So, yeah, but that's an interesting question.
Yeah, I feel like I didn't maybe phrase that in the right way. But
no, you did. I totally got what you're saying.
All right,
and
good.
I think it's really interesting.
Yeah.
I've never been asked that before.
Yeah, so I was thinking about like what you were saying about the 12-step program, because I know in your books you talk a lot about like how you felt kind of alienated by it, because there's this idea of the higher power and having to submit to, you know, there's this religious component where you were like, well, if I don't really believe in God, then like, what the hell? What am I supposed to do if people are telling you this is the only sort of way? So I guess like how did you sort of come to love the 12 steps, and then what would you say to people who might also be kind of struggling with that aspect?
That's a really good question. Okay, I kind of look at addiction as being like a perfect storm of all these different pieces that come together to make someone an addict. Like a lot of times there can be a genetic component. There isn't always, but there definitely can be. Like my grandfather drank himself to death, literally. And I guess on my mom's side of the family, there's like alcoholism going back generations. They say the younger someone starts using drugs and alcohol, the more likely they are to develop a dependency. I started when I was, 11, smoking pot. People who've experienced trauma, whatever. So it's all these different pieces that come together to make someone an addict. And I feel like recovery is kind of a similar thing, but like the opposite, which is like all these different puzzle pieces that come together that allow someone to get sober and then to stay sober. And I think it's different for everybody. I think there's finding out what those puzzle pieces are is kind of like our job as someone who is in recovery. And yeah, they're different for everybody for sure. Like for me, like I said, getting the bipolar diagnosis, like getting on lithium or whatever, and Lamictal, those were puzzle pieces for me. The 12 steps, I did not think were going to be a puzzle piece for me because it was really hard for me to kind of accept the higher power thing was one thing that I struggled with for sure. I also really struggled with the kind of, I don't know, there can be a kind of a culty kind of feeling in the 12 steps where it's like everyone's talking about how great they are and looking to these kind of people as kind of gurus within the program or something. I think the way that I kind of got over that was that at a certain point I was just so desperate. Like I feel like I'd relapsed over and over again, like I talked about. I just was so beaten down by life, and not just actually with substances, but also with these sort of co-occurring addictions that I had, like stuff with relationships. And so I guess I just was so desperate at a certain point that I was kind of like, okay, I don't believe in this God stuff, and there's a lot of things about the program that are really kind of off-putting to me, but I'm just gonna like give it a shot because I don't know what else to do. And when I did that and I started just kind of doing it and kind of, it's funny, it's something they say in the 12-step program is like, take what you want and leave the rest or something. But I guess that is what I kind of started to do. And anyway, I started to see the results from that. And so personally, it did become something where, I really like this group of guys that I have that do this Zoom meeting with like every other day. And, I have a great group of friends from the program, and the tools that they've taught me are very useful in my life. But I totally get that it's not right for everybody. And I think there's nothing more dangerous for people, especially in early sobriety, than telling them like, there's one way that you can get sober, and if you don't do it this way, you're not going to make it, because I think that is really not helpful, and it's not true. People have found their way to sobriety, and to, the goal is to be like a relatively happy, productive member of society or whatever. Yeah. And however you have to do that, I feel like I'm all for that. But I did find ultimately that I got a lot of more good out of the 12-step stuff than bad.
Mm. So for college students, what would you say if people are struggling with substance use?
It's definitely a tough time, I know, because I know it feels like, well, first of all, it feels like that's such a big part of the way that, like drugs and alcohol are such a big part of the way that we socialize with each other, right? So it seems like not having that as a way to like interact with one another is like a death sentence almost, or it did feel that way to me at that time. Like I felt like I was never going to be able to like go to a party or go to a concert or do anything if I didn't have some kind of substance. So that was really hard. And, I don't know if it's still this way, but I remember when I first was trying to go to some 12-step meetings when I was in college, I would go to, the meetings in the little town where I was actually in Western Massachusetts. And it wasn't a lot of college students that were in the meetings. It was like a bunch of old guys from the town or whatever that I didn't feel like I could really relate to. So that felt really like alienating. And the cool thing now is that I think there are so many more young people that are in recovery, and that the meetings are getting more and more kind of diverse in terms of the sort of different backgrounds that people come from who are coming to the meetings. Also, the Zoom meetings are really great in a way to sort of reach out and get some sort of guidance, I guess, without having to like actually, go and find a meeting. You can just open up your computer, which is amazing. But also, I guess the thing is that, like I said, when I was really struggling when I was younger, I never talked about it or asked for help from anybody, because I just didn't think that, first of all, I didn't think anyone would be able to understand. But even if they could understand, I didn't think they'd be able to do anything about it to make me better, because I just felt like that's who I was. Like I was this person that, yeah, like I said, like I hated myself. I was uncomfortable in my own skin. I was full of all this anxiety. And it just felt like that was me. And the one thing I'd found to take that away a little bit sometimes was like doing drugs or drinking. And so it just felt like even if I talked about it, no one would be able to help me. But what I know now is that, like I said, like the work does work. And so if I had asked for help, I would have met, professionals who would have been able to offer advice to me and offer solutions for me that would have actually worked. And so that's the thing, I guess, that I would just urge you all more than anything else, is just to believe that the help is out there if you ask for it, and and just to know that it's not easy, and it can take a little bit of time, but ultimately, like, we all can find those puzzle pieces that are our puzzle pieces that are going to be the ones that help us to feel okay in our own and comfortable in our own skin. And that's been a cool thing about traveling around the country is seeing that in every community there are these organizations, there are these programs that can really make a difference in people's lives and make it so we don't have to go to the same depth of sort of destruction that I did. And again, because it is so dangerous right now, I mean, you just don't have the luxury of experimenting, in the same way that I did when I was your guys' age.
Yeah, that's, one of like the biggest takeaways, I would say. Man, I could sit here and talk for a long time, but I think we can have a couple minutes for questions of the audience. If anybody would like to ask anything themselves, we can maybe raise your hand. We got one hand over here. I would say just keep the questions short.
I'll try to keep the answers short.
That's okay.
For me.
Hi, I was curious about what you think the top 3 takeaways people in the general public should know about recovery.
That's a good question. I think there is still this idea that, people who are addicted are, kind of morally bad or whatever. There's a saying that it's like addicts aren't bad people who have to get good. They're sick people who have to get well. And, it took me a while to believe this, but addiction, alcoholism, it is a disease. It's a brain disease. If I had diabetes, I would have to take my insulin every day and watch what I ate and monitor my blood sugar or whatever. I don't have diabetes. I have the disease of alcoholism, and so I have to do all the stuff that I have to do that I've already talked about to be okay. Sort of spreading that awareness that it is a disease, but it's a disease that that there is a solution to, and it is something that you can heal from and get better from, I think is really important, because I didn't know that. Growing up, I never heard that concept before. And like I said, my grandfather drank himself to death, alcoholism on my mom's side of the family. I think it would have been helpful for me to know that when I was growing up, that it was possible that I might have this same brain disease that my grandfather had, but that wasn't something that I was taught. So I think it's important to spread that awareness to people.
Yeah. One here?
Consideration that everyone is really different. If you could go back and wish for how you wanted people to be with you in your recovery and your relapse times, what you could have asked from them, what would you have said?
That's a great question. I think we were talking about this just earlier, that some of the treatment centers that I was in were more sort of like punishment based or something, where it was kind of like they would take all your privileges away, and they would make you feel like you had to sort of walk this very straight line, and if you deviated at all, that you were like this bad person, and so they were going to punish you. And I was saying this already, but I already felt like my will to live wasn't super strong to begin with, and so the more people made me feel like I had to suffer and be punished, the more I just was like gonna be like, well, fuck this, I'm just gonna go end my life, because I feel like I was always pretty close to that. So I think the more that people who are struggling can be treated with, love and understanding and patience, and be told that, it's kind of what I'm trying to say tonight, is that, your life will get better when you get sober. Even though it feels like it's not going to happen, that's not possible, it really is. And so, doing the work, just putting one foot in front of the other and doing the next right thing, it's like our lives do get better, and our worlds open up, and we start to heal, and our relationships heal. It just takes time, and it takes work, but I think spreading that message of like positivity and hope and love is so important, as opposed to making it sort of a more negative, kind of like you're bad and you've been bad, and so you need to be punished kind of thing. And I guess maybe that goes to, the way that people are treated in the criminal justice system as well. I mean, as much as we can sort of help get people, into diversion programs and into treatment rather than just incarcerate people, the better.
I think one more? Time for maybe one more question? Maybe right back there? Right behind. Did you have your hand up? Yeah. I don't have my glasses on.
To what extent do you think harm reduction practices like safe injection sites and such are helpful for those addicted?
Oh, that's a great question, and we didn't even talk about that, but harm reduction is amazing. Like, I feel like when I was in my active addiction, I went to needle exchanges, and I didn't give I didn't care what happened to me, and I didn't think I had any future. So if those hadn't existed, I would have definitely used dirty needles. I would have used anything that was around. I did not care. But the fact that it was so easy to go, and go to a truck and get clean needles and equipment made probably saved my life. But then also it makes me just think about something we were talking about earlier, which is medication-assisted treatment, like methadone and Suboxone, which, there is a real stigma about using those drugs, and I think people can be made to feel, even in the 12-step program, they could be made to feel like they're not really sober if they're using medication-assisted treatment. And in my mind, I think anything we can do that can help save people's lives is a positive thing. And I was on Suboxone, which is like an opiate blocker, basically, for years. And, I felt like I had to not talk about it because people made me feel like I wasn't sober when I was on it, even though I experienced the fact that being on it, it wasn't a mind-altering substance. I was totally clear. I just was taking this medication every day. So I think the more, it's definitely a lesser of two evils, but it's like such a lesser of two evils. And the focus right now, especially with the fentanyl crisis, is really about saving people's lives. So all that stuff I'm very for. So thanks for bringing that up. That's a good thing that we got to talk about.
Yeah, that was a great question. Thank you. Unfortunately, I think this is where we're going to have to end. Yes, we do have a little gift for you as a thank you for
amazing.
coming.
Thank you. Also, I'm going to be signing books, right?
Yes.
So you can come ask me questions.
Yeah, we'll be out in the lobby. And thank you so much. Thank you, Dean Cunningham.